Thank you all very much. This very interesting, provocative, this session on ultra-processed food is now open for questions. We've heard a wide range of topics, and we've also heard that we need to have a NOVA 2.0, 2.1. You know, I had the pleasure of working with Carlos during around the time when he was putting together this NOVA classification. We worked together on the PAHO WHO nutrient profile policy, that the basis of which was the NOVA classification. Sorry, the NOVA classification was the basis of the profile of the nutrient profile policy. And I think the intention of that, the NOVA classification was simply to promote, to differentiate between wholesome whole foods and processed foods. We have a question, Anne.
Yes. If you have Egyptian diet, so they will. That's a great question. Yeah, but diet. We understand that from other studies. One of them, for example, compare low-fat diet with the grain diet. That we can yeah,
Mr. Bernard is online. He is also available to answer questions.
I'm sorry to say, the technology gods didn't allow me to hear the question. I wonder if you could repeat.
I'll repeat the question if there is a question to you.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question. Did you want me to repeat all the questions from the room?
No, it's perfectly fine. If you have a question for me, if you'd repeat it, but forgive me, I mistook. I thought you were directing a question to me.
Thank you all for the presentation. I was wondering, also back to the list of Dr. Hess, if you would make a trial food diet, both isocaloric food diet quality and also food adequacy. What would that do on, for example, cardiometabolic risk factors? Is that both diets? Of course, one of them would be ultra-processed food, the other one would be non-ultra-processed food. Do you think that would be even an option to do it, and we could expect really to see different results if with food adequacy and also diet quality and the energy intake would remain the same?
That's an excellent question. And I think that's what needs to be done. I also just found out yesterday morning that our trial was approved, so we are moving forward with having an isocaloric diet, mostly ultra-processed foods, mostly less processed foods, according to that NOVA system. We're going to try to match the diet quality. We're going to try to match the all micronutrients. We're working on the menu right now, so it does look like it will be possible. It's going to take a long time to develop a menu that's that closely aligned. So we're spending about a year developing the menu for the diet alone, and then we'll move forward into this trial probably sometime next year. So stay tuned.
Benoit.
Thank you very much, Benoit. This was really a very interesting workshop and discussion and very different point of views. I think it's Julie talked about some of the issues with regard to implementing less consumption of ultra-processed food and issues related to equities and prices and it's not a question, it's more of a comment, but one of the potential downside of going back to cooking is, you know, gender inequity issue. And it's all nice to say we should cook more and everything, but at the end of the day, the responsibility falls on the women still in the cooking responsibilities in the family. And so this is something that we need to keep in mind because this is a major problem. Yeah. I'm all for more cooking, but it's a major problem.
So the question was on the location of cooking and who would be doing the cooking. Dr. Bernard, did you want to take a shot at that?
If I understood the question right, that it's not just a question of the
It's a
processing of it.
comment. It's a comment. But just to add to that, Dr. Srour talked about you suggested that we can actually generate ultra processed food at home.
Yes, I think the point that I was trying to get across, if I may, is that when we do these things, whether it's done in a biological or in a mechanical type factory, or done in the home, the micronutrient content might be altered with the addition of things. We're going to add salt and sugar, whether it's in a factory or we're doing it at home. But the point about contrasting biological processing is that the processing is much more profound. One doesn't actually break up the starch molecules when one is cooking them at home typically, and one isn't breaking up the amino acid sequence of the proteins with mechanical processing, but one does do so in the biological processing. So I think it certainly is true that home processing can be either helpful or destructive in the same way as it can be in a factory. The biological processing is another level.
Great, thanks. So, do you want to add to that?
Yes, I do agree that it all depends on the ingredients that we use, and it all depends also on the processing techniques that we use. We were talking about uniform compounds, but there are studies that have shown earlier that we would be at risk of forming more uniform compounds for home cooking because we do not control the temperature of pepper, which is different from what comes from industrial products. So it's definitely not the majority of ultra processed food that comes from
Ask the question back, which is, what is a home cooked meal? And what are the ingredients going into it? If I use canned pinto beans and I make them into soup at home, is that a home cooked meal?
Dr. Bernard, I'll repeat the question. Maybe you could add to this. So the question is, if Julie cooks a home cooked meal of soup and use canned pinto bean, is that still a home cooked meal? Did that summarize the question?
I'm sorry, can you clarify the question? Is the question if I use canned beans, is that still a home cooked meal?
Yes, pretty much.
I think these are simply questions. These aren't really scientific questions. It's simply a question of definition. I would say you could certainly consider it. So the alteration of a bean in putting it in the can is rather minimal either way. Regardless of whether you cook it at home or you put it in a can, either way, the nutrient changes are really minimal.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So nice question. I mean, like originally one of the main motivations of this ultra processed food classification is the question of purpose of processing. And I think this is where it's quite convincing that if you have the purpose to design a food that is like eaten in the most possible quantity and produced at the lowest possible price, that this, yes, purpose is reached and is not good for the people who actually eat the food. But that doesn't imply the conclusion that you shouldn't process foods, it's that you should take the purpose of processing foods. So what are your thoughts? Is this classification helpful to change the purpose of food processing?
I don't think that was the purpose of the classification, but I'll let the panel answer that question.
thank you for the question. It's actually one of the calculating food according to the degree and the purpose of processing. So as I was saying in my talk, the tricky thing about is that if we stand on the food system level, it's completely understandable, and we might understand why producing foods to generate more profit and to sell it for more profit and for people to overconsume, etc. This is the problem. But then if we look into the level of individual food product, we cannot have this information. And also from a technological point of view and biological point of view, it wouldn't be very plausible to say that at the level of the food product, according to the purpose why the food has been produced, it might have different effects on this. So what I would say is that what needs to be done is not just reformulate the food at the food level, but it's also a matter of a food system where we should maybe encourage political action to change the purpose or to regulate more the reason why these foods are produced. So I don't think this question can be answered with technology or Ramdath control science. It's a more broad question that should be answered from a political global point of view. That's my comment.
I agree with you that I don't think it's possible to put a scientific framework around determining the purpose of why something is in process. Why has soup been processed to be put in? Would be the question I would ask them. Does that intrinsically make it something less helpful because I didn't make it at home?
If I was only that, I mean, I completely agree, but then I think in the room we are more of scientists in biology, epidemiology, nutrition, etc. And I think that perhaps scientists in sociology or anthropology, etc., would be able to give a sharper answer to this question that this assembly here doesn't necessarily have. Like sociologists or
Dr. Bernard, the question here being discussed in the room is considering the purpose of the NOVA classification. Is it to recognize ultra processed food, or is it to promote more consumption of more whole unprocessed foods?
There does seem to be a difference between the motivations for creating the system and the uses to which it's been put after it was created. Because processing, we have to remember, is often been done in order to improve food quality systems so that foods can be preserved and perhaps enhanced, enriched with things like folate, so that we're going to be hopefully improving health outcomes. But after the adoption of this, or I guess I shouldn't say adoption, but the rather widespread use of the NOVA system, it's become viewed as a negative to be in category 4, that these are ultra processed foods that are particularly harmful. As we've seen from some of the previous presentations, that doesn't really hold up when we actually look at the data we have. And we probably also need to be reminded, as the speakers pointed out, that we are relying so much on observational data and have a real paucity of clinical trial data that actually allows us to test the hypotheses that are under consideration.
Thank you. If there aren't any more questions, yes, some last question before we close the session.
I think I read the original document by Marinangeli. I think the language implies that if the food is in NOVA category 4, the quality is bad. But stuff I don't think is really against the protect he mentioned protecting environmental. The brain is not protect, to make it over for the quality and the benefits. So that part can be in that. I think his language implies that the category 4 is implies, which I think including the time of the field for that it's necessary. It's that harder than 100% necessary. Well, imperfect. Some absolutely the way that
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Join me in thanking the panel. And Thank you, Dr. Neal.